The stage was set for a clash between two legal titans in front of millions. Alan Dershowitz, a towering figure in the legal world, and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a rising star with real-world legal experience. What started as a routine CNN discussion quickly escalated into an all-out intellectual battle that would leave Dershowitz speechless and completely exposed. Dershowitz, at 85 years old, was a Harvard Law School professor emeritus, known for defending high-profile figures like O.J. Simpson, Jeffrey Epstein, and Donald Trump. His career spanned decades, and his name was synonymous with the elite legal establishment. Confident and sure of his superiority, he walked into the debate with the arrogance of someone who had always been revered, thinking his Harvard credentials alone would intimidate any opponent. On the other side, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, 43, stood poised and prepared. Crockett was a former public defender and a current congresswoman, known for her sharp legal mind and no-nonsense approach to fighting for civil rights and justice. While Dershowitz had the academic pedigree, Crockett had real-world experience that came from fighting for the underrepresented in courtrooms, not lecturing from ivory towers. The tension in the CNN studio was palpable. With every word that passed between them, the stakes seemed to grow higher. Dershowitz, used to being the authority, tried to undermine Crockett with his usual arrogance, but he made a critical mistake. He questioned her legal knowledge and credentials, assuming his Harvard pedigree would silence her. What he didn't realize was that he had just picked a fight with someone who had done her homework, and more importantly, someone who had real-world legal expertise. The first verbal blow came when Dershowitz tried to challenge Crockett's qualifications. He mocked her legal background, thinking her experience was no match for his years in academia. But what followed would shatter his perception and expose the fragility of his establishment mindset. Crockett responded calmly, explaining that she had earned her law degree from the University of Houston Law Center, a respected institution, and had worked as a public defender before becoming a congresswoman. She pointed out that her work had real-world impact, defending people who couldn't afford attorneys and taking on cases that actually made a difference in people's lives. The audience was riveted as Crockett laid out her experience with precision, leaving Dershowitz stammering and unable to regain control of the conversation. But Crockett didn't stop there. She methodically deconstructed Dershowitz's credentials, calling out his association with controversial figures and the privilege that had defined his career. She pointed out the flaws in his academic-centric worldview, explaining how her experience in Congress had given her a more nuanced understanding of law and policy than any Ivy League education could offer. As Dershowitz floundered, trying to regain the upper hand, Crockett delivered the knockout punch. She asked him directly, what exactly were his qualifications to question her intelligence on matters of criminal justice and constitutional law? Dershowitz, a man who had built his career on being the authority, had no answer. He could only sit in stunned silence. The real shift came when Crockett began explaining her Criminal Justice Reform Act of 2024, an issue she had spent years studying and fighting for. She outlined her bill with expert precision, highlighting its focus on sentencing disparities, rehabilitation programs, and judicial accountability, issues Dershowitz had little understanding of. It became clear to the entire audience. While Dershowitz may have written academic papers and defended celebrities, Crockett was a force to be reckoned with in real-world legal reform. The studio was silent as Crockett finished her argument, delivering a final line that would become legendary. Next time you want to question someone's intelligence, maybe make sure you're qualified to have that conversation. The audience erupted in applause, recognizing that they had just witnessed something historic, an intellectual masterclass on national television. Dershowitz, once confident and smug, was now visibly rattled. His reputation, built over decades, had been shattered in mere minutes. The debate was over, and he had been thoroughly outclassed by a younger, more prepared woman. As the show went to commercial, Rosie O'Donnell's embarrassment was palpable. She was clearly taken aback by what had just unfolded and made a quick exit, leaving the studio to process what had just happened. But Crockett remained calm and composed, handling the aftermath with the grace and poise of someone who knew that her victory was not just about this one exchange. It was about reshaping how the public viewed legal expertise, especially when it came to those who represented the marginalized and the oppressed. For Alan Dershowitz, the idea that someone from a non-Ivy League law school could challenge his expertise was more than an inconvenience. It was an existential threat. His entire identity and career had been built on the assumption that elite education equated intellectual supremacy. To him, credentials like those from Harvard were the gold standard, and anyone who didn't share that pedigree simply couldn't compete at his level. But Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, with her practical legal experience and formidable intellect, was about to turn that assumption upside down on national television. Dershowitz, at 85, was a fixture of the American legal establishment. A Harvard law professor emeritus, a high-profile defender of controversial figures, and an author of numerous books, he was used to being the smartest person in the room. His career was grounded in constitutional law, and his reputation had been built over decades of defending high-profile individuals and shaping legal discourse in the media. His status granted him authority, and his Ivy League pedigree was his shield. On the other side of the stage sat Jasmine Crockett, 43, an experienced civil rights attorney and freshman congresswoman from Texas. Crockett didn't attend Harvard or Yale. She earned her law degree at the University of Houston Law Center. But she didn't need to attend an Ivy League school to prove her worth. Crockett had spent her career in the trenches, fighting for the rights of the underserved, handling complex criminal cases, and now, as a congresswoman, using her legal expertise to challenge institutional injustices in Washington. She had already proven herself as one of the sharpest legal minds in Congress, with a reputation for cutting through political red tape and making even the most seasoned politicians rethink their positions. The CNN segment began innocently enough. Host Anderson Cooper introduced both guests to discuss the legal complexities surrounding the Trump federal election interference case. What was supposed to be a polite discussion quickly morphed into a clash of intellectual heavyweights, but only one would leave the discussion with their reputation intact. As the debate unfolded, Dershowitz, in his typical fashion, leaned forward and began to pontificate about executive privilege, framing it as a matter of historical precedent and deep constitutional study. His tone was authoritative, dripping with academic condescension, as he positioned himself as the sole authority on the matter. Crockett, undeterred, listened quietly, her face a study of calm composure. When her turn came, she calmly cut through his academic jargon with one clear, concise statement. The question isn't about whether the presidency deserves respect. It's about whether anyone, including presidents, can be above the law. It was a simple, direct answer that laid out the practical implications of the case. Without relying on complicated legalese, Dershowitz, who had clearly underestimated her, responded by dismissing her perspective as politically motivated and lacking the depth of legal analysis. He implied that her understanding of constitutional law was superficial, something she might get away with in political hearings, but not in a serious legal discussion. That's when he made his first mistake. His comment, intended to belittle Crockett's legal experience, was met with a sharp and measured response. "Professor, I think you might be surprised by how much constitutional law Congresspeople actually need to understand," Crockett replied, her voice steady and controlled. "We take an oath to defend the Constitution, and many of us take that responsibility very seriously." She didn't allow his condescension to rattle her. Instead, she turned the conversation back to the substance of the issue at hand. But it didn't stop there. Dershowitz, in his quest to reassert his dominance, went further, questioning her qualifications with the type of elitist assumption that too often disregards the real-world experience of those from outside the Ivy League bubble. He asked with a dismissive smile, "Where did you study law?" It was a classic move. Undermine the opponent's credentials, assume their knowledge is limited, and dismiss their arguments as lacking the intellectual rigor only Harvard could provide. Crockett paused, taking in the moment. She had heard it before, the snide remarks from those who believed their Ivy League degrees were the only valid form of intellectual currency. But this time she wasn't going to let it slide. "I studied at the University of Houston Law Center," she said. Her tone even, "Not Harvard, if that's what you're getting at." Dershowitz, caught off guard, smiled again, but this time it was a smile of discomfort. He tried to brush off her response, but it was clear that the ground was shifting beneath him. Crockett wasn't intimidated by his academic pedigree, nor was she going to allow his status to dismiss her hard-earned qualifications. But she wasn't done. With the poise of a seasoned litigator, Crockett launched into a thorough fact-check of Dershowitz's own public commentary. She pointed out his recent social media blunders, claiming the Supreme Court had 12 justices when there were 9, asserting that impeachment required a unanimous Senate vote, and mistaking the date the Constitution was written. These weren't minor errors. They were basic facts that anyone claiming to be a constitutional expert should know. As the audience began to realize the gravity of what was happening, Crockett continued her relentless dissection. She reminded Dershowitz that he had built his career on lecturing others about the law, but when it came to facts and constitutional knowledge, he had shown himself to be woefully unprepared. Her calm, controlled delivery only added to the weight of her words. Dershowitz, once the undisputed king of legal commentary, was now left with no way to defend himself. He tried to regain control, but his responses were hollow and increasingly desperate. Crockett, having established her intellectual superiority, turned to her current work in Congress and her criminal justice reform efforts. She detailed her work on sentencing disparities, judicial accountability, and rehabilitation programs, areas where her practical experience far outstripped Dershowitz's theoretical knowledge. She finished by asking him a simple but devastating question. "What specific provisions of my legislation do you disagree with, and why? And can you support your arguments with legal precedent?" The silence that followed was deafening. Dershowitz had nothing. His academic credentials had been shattered, his arguments dismantled piece by piece. Crockett, on the other hand, stood poised, having just delivered the intellectual blow of a lifetime. And then, with a final, quiet remark, Crockett ended the exchange. "Next time you want to question someone's intelligence, maybe make sure you're qualified to have that conversation." The studio erupted into applause. The moment had been historic, and the internet wasted no time in making sure everyone saw it. What had begun as an academic sparring match ended with one of the most devastating public intellectual defeats in recent memory. In that one moment, Jasmine Crockett had not just demonstrated her legal prowess, she had reshaped the way America would view intellectual authority, elite credentials, and the power of preparation. "What I learned, Professor, is that the law doesn't bend to titles or privilege. It bends to justice. It's not about where you went to school or who you know. It's about holding those in power accountable for their actions, regardless of their position or pedigree." Crockett's words hung in the air, the weight of her experience and conviction palpable. The studio remained silent, and even Dershowitz seemed to understand he was being outclassed. "I've argued these cases in front of judges who have the power to make real decisions that impact people's lives," Crockett continued. "And unlike those with academic credentials who sit in ivory towers, I've seen the consequences of these decisions on the ground, where real people face real injustice." Dershowitz's face was no longer the smug mask of confidence. His usual arrogance had been replaced by something else, uncertainty. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Jasmine wasn't done. She turned the conversation back to the law, building on her own experience. "You're right that the legal system needs deep knowledge, but you're mistaken if you think knowledge only comes from an Ivy League classroom. Real legal work isn't about repeating theories in front of students. It's about standing up for justice when it's on the line." At this point, she made the final blow. "And Professor, I don't need a Harvard degree to know that a person in power, no matter who they are, shouldn't be above the law. Your obsession with credentials is exactly what's wrong with the legal system today. It values prestige over action, theory over practice, and rhetoric over results." The silence that followed was deafening. Dershowitz, once the champion of legal elitism, now appeared completely deflated. Jasmine Crockett had just dismantled the entire framework he'd spent a lifetime building, and she had done it with facts, precision, and, most importantly, a deep understanding of the law that no amount of pedigree could match. The studio erupted as Crockett finished her response, the audience fully aware of the significance of what had just transpired. Dershowitz, realizing he was outmatched, couldn't respond. His earlier smirk had turned to an expression of stunned disbelief. Anderson Cooper, who had been silently watching the exchange unfold, looked to his guests and then to the camera. "Well," he said with a shake of his head, "that was certainly not the answer we were expecting." The debate that followed turned into an awkward back and forth. But it was clear to everyone in the studio and to the millions of viewers watching that the intellectual battle had already been won. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just stood her ground. She had proven without a doubt that knowledge and real-world experience will always trump elitism, regardless of who you are or where you come from. The aftermath was swift and overwhelming. Social media erupted in support for Crockett, while legal experts began analyzing every moment of her performance. This moment wasn't just about a debate. It was about the changing landscape of what real legal expertise looks like in America. And for Alan Dershowitz, it was the moment when his decades of unchecked superiority were finally called into question by someone who wasn't afraid to expose the truth. The legal community was left in shock as Jasmine Crockett turned the tables on Alan Dershowitz in a televised confrontation that would go down in history. What had started as a standard debate on CNN escalated into a masterclass in legal precision and intellectual superiority, with Crockett leaving Dershowitz speechless and exposed in front of millions. Dershowitz, known for his decades-long career defending high-profile figures and his Harvard pedigree, had made the mistake of dismissing Crockett's qualifications. He believed his Ivy League background and status as a professor emeritus at Harvard Law School would intimidate the young congresswoman. But what he didn't count on was her ability to not only hold her own, but to use his own work against him. When Crockett calmly questioned Dershowitz's position on executive privilege and presidential immunity, she referenced his 1982 article, "Executive Privilege, a Constitutional Myth," where he had argued that no president should be allowed to hide behind claims of executive privilege when criminal conduct is involved. Crockett made the devastating connection, exposing how Dershowitz's more recent arguments about President Trump's actions contradicted his own earlier scholarship. With her quiet, methodical delivery, Crockett systematically dismantled the idea that credentials alone should define legal expertise. "Experience matters, Professor," she had said. "But knowledge isn't exclusive to those with Ivy League degrees. I've argued these principles in federal courtrooms representing the very people whose rights are at stake. That's where real legal education happens. Out in the world, not just in a classroom." As the audience and viewers from across the country absorbed the clash, they could feel the shift in power. The CNN studio, initially tense and silent, now buzzed with the weight of what had just happened. Legal experts, sitting at their desks and watching from across the nation, were quick to recognize that Crockett had just exposed the legal elite's biggest flaw, its assumption that intellectual superiority came solely from prestigious pedigrees. Dershowitz, who had prided himself on being the intellectual giant of the legal world, could only sit in stunned silence, unable to respond as Crockett continued her brilliant takedown. She cited case law, referenced Supreme Court precedents, and masterfully framed her argument with a calm confidence that further exposed his intellectual arrogance. The moment reached its peak when Crockett turned to the camera and said, "The Constitution doesn't care about your title, your pedigree, or your reputation. It cares about your actions." The silence that followed was deafening. The camera zoomed in on a now defeated Dershowitz, who could only offer weak responses that were quickly overshadowed by Crockett's powerful rebuttals. Social media erupted in real time. Legal professionals across the globe shared their disbelief at the skill and precision with which Crockett had dismantled one of the most respected legal figures of modern times. On platforms like X, formerly Twitter, the hashtag #CrockettDestroysDershowitz began trending, and within minutes, The viral video of Crockett quoting Dershowitz's own work had garnered millions of views. Legal YouTubers, influencers, and pundits quickly picked up on the moment. Did Jasmine Crockett just deliver the most devastating takedown in legal television history? Asked a Georgetown law professor. Legal Eagle, a popular lawyer YouTuber with over 3 million followers, posted, "Holy, Jasmine Crockett just used Alan Dershowitz's own scholarship to expose his hypocrisy on live television." Behind the scenes at CNN, staff members were in awe. "That's the best legal television we've ever broadcast," one producer said. Even the makeup artists and camera crew, who had witnessed countless debates, recognized that something truly extraordinary had just taken place. Crockett's poise, intellectual rigor, and real-world legal experience had proven more than just a match for Dershowitz's decades of academic credentials. She had shown the world that real expertise isn't about where you studied, but how you apply the law when it truly matters. For Dershowitz, this would be a moment he could never recover from. His academic arrogance had been exposed on a national stage, and despite his attempts to defend his position, his reputation would never be the same. As the broadcast wrapped up, Anderson Cooper turned to the camera, clearly aware of the magnitude of what had just unfolded. He was a witness to history, as was every viewer tuning in. The debate between Crockett and Dershowitz had become more than just a legal discussion. It had turned into a revolution in how we view the legal system and who gets to wield power within it. Jasmine Crockett's victory had nothing to do with her background or title. It was about how she used her legal knowledge, experience, and preparation to stand firm against an elitist attack. She had just rewritten the playbook on how to handle elitism and privilege in legal discourse, and she did it all on live television. The moment Jasmine Crockett took down Alan Dershowitz on national television wasn't just a legal victory. It was a seismic shift in how we view expertise, education, and authority. What started as a seemingly routine CNN debate quickly turned into an unforgettable display of how true legal mastery and real-world experience can demolish academic arrogance. Within minutes of the broadcast, social media exploded with reactions. Memes flooded Twitter, with one of the most popular featuring Dershowitz's shocked expression, accompanied by the caption, "When you find out regional law schools actually teach constitutional law, too." But the social media buzz was just the beginning. The ripple effects were felt deeply within the legal community. Legal blogs and professional publications quickly went to work, analyzing Crockett's precise constitutional arguments. The Harvard Law Review's Twitter account even posted a detailed breakdown, confirming that every citation Crockett made was accurate and every legal point she presented was rock solid. They concluded, regardless of institutional affiliation, this was constitutional advocacy at its finest. Prominent legal scholars began publicly rethinking their own assumptions about legal education. UCLA Law's Professor Kimberly Crenshaw tweeted, "What we just witnessed is why diversity in legal education matters. Different perspectives and experiences create better lawyers, not just different lawyers." Even some of Dershowitz's Harvard colleagues distanced themselves from his performance, with constitutional law legend Professor Lawrence Tribe posting, "Legal expertise is demonstrated through reasoning and knowledge, not institutional pedigree." Tonight's CNN segment was a powerful reminder of that principle. The influence of the confrontation reached beyond legal circles. Political strategists quickly recognized the significance of Crockett's performance, viewing it as a blueprint for how to challenge intellectual elitism with facts and preparation. One senior Democratic strategist, speaking anonymously to Politico, remarked, "Jasmine just showed how to take down elitist condescension with facts and preparation. This will be studied in every political communications workshop." Republican voices, usually eager to defend such figures, were unusually quiet. Some GOP members acknowledged Crockett's prowess, with one congressional representative saying, "I may disagree with her politics, but you have to respect her preparation and intellect. She represented herself and her office with distinction." The cultural and educational impact was equally profound. The University of Houston Law Center, where Crockett earned her degree, reported a 40% spike in website traffic within hours, with many prospective students specifically mentioning the CNN segment in their inquiries. It became clear students wanted a legal education rooted in real-world application, just like Crockett had learned. In response, several law schools launched new programs focused on practical constitutional advocacy and civil rights litigation, directly inspired by Crockett's approach. Elite law schools, while supportive of the general principle of rigorous legal discourse, took a more cautious approach. Harvard Law issued a statement affirming their commitment to open, respectful debate from all qualified individuals, but avoided defending Dershowitz's dismissive comments about regional law schools. Yale Law's dean echoed similar sentiments on LinkedIn, emphasizing that excellence in legal reasoning transcends institutional boundaries. Perhaps the most significant shift came in the form of an open letter from over 200 professors from state schools and regional institutions. Titled Legal Excellence Beyond the Ivy League, it argued that Crockett's performance demonstrated the value of diverse educational backgrounds in creating effective legal advocates. It was a turning point in how legal expertise, and who possesses it, would be viewed moving forward. Dershowitz, in an attempt to do damage control, quickly published a blog post titled Defending Academic Standards in Legal Education. He tried to frame his comments as having been taken out of context, claiming that he deeply respects lawyers from all backgrounds. However, the post did little to salvage his reputation. Legal Twitter erupted with screenshots of the post alongside his original dismissive comments exposing the hypocrisy. When media outlets requested follow-up interviews, Dershowitz's representatives declined all offers, leaving his silence to speak volumes. The aftermath reverberated beyond legal and political circles. Women's professional organizations, such as the National Association of Women Lawyers, praised Crockett's performance as a textbook example of how to handle condescending behavior in the workplace. The NAACP also lauded Crockett's victory, tweeting, "This is why representation matters. Different voices bring different strengths." Jasmine Crockett showed the power of that principle. The lasting impact of this exchange began to take shape almost immediately. Legal education experts predicted that this moment would influence how law schools market their programs and recruit students, with an increased emphasis on diversity and practical legal training. In the end, what Jasmine Crockett demonstrated was that real expertise isn't defined by where you went to school, but by how you use your knowledge and experience to make a tangible difference. She didn't just challenge the old guard of legal elitism, she dismantled it. The message was clear. Preparation, merit, and real-world experience matter more than pedigree, and that lesson will echo through the legal community and beyond for years to come. The long-standing hierarchy in legal education has often been rooted in historical privilege and artificial scarcity, as one researcher aptly put it. What Jasmine Crockett proved, however, is that practical legal training and real-world experience can be just as valuable, if not more so, than elite academic credentials. Following this revelation, several law schools announced shifts in focus, emphasizing practical training programs and connections to working legal professionals over just academic prestige. More than just reshaping how law schools approach education, Crockett provided a new blueprint for responding to elitist condescension in public forums. Her approach, thorough preparation, precise legal arguments, and confident delivery, became a model that would be studied and emulated across various fields. Public speaking coaches began analyzing her techniques, while political communications experts incorporated her methods into their training programs. Law professors used her performance as an example of effective legal advocacy. Back in Congress, Crockett's colleagues, both Democrat and Republican, began to take notice. Several representatives expressed private admiration for her performance, and Democratic leadership began considering her for more prominent roles in legal and constitutional discussions. Rumors even surfaced that House Judiciary Committee leadership was planning to give her more significant questioning time in upcoming hearings. On the Republican side, members were notably more respectful in subsequent committee interactions, understanding that underestimating Crockett's legal expertise was a mistake they wouldn't repeat. Television networks and media producers also took note. Within days, several networks reached out to her office for availability in legal commentary and analysis. It became clear that the era of deferring solely to elite academic credentials was coming to an end. Audiences now sought legal experts who could combine scholarly knowledge with real-world experience and principled advocacy. CNN itself began featuring more diverse legal commentators, including attorneys from non-elite law schools who brought practical experience to their analysis. The broader implications of the exchange became increasingly apparent. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just won a debate. She had challenged the foundational assumptions about authority, expertise, and respect in American professional life. Young lawyers from diverse backgrounds gained newfound confidence in their abilities and perspectives, while law students at non-elite institutions felt validated in their career choices. Women and people of color in professional settings now had a powerful example of how to respond to condescending behavior with strength and intelligence. The legal profession, too, began a much-needed conversation about how expertise is defined and valued. The old assumptions about hierarchy and credentials were being questioned, and as a result, the profession would emerge stronger and more inclusive. Above all, the exchange demonstrated that in America's ongoing discussions about law, politics, and justice, the true measure of qualification isn't where you went to school or what your credentials look like. It's whether you can think clearly, argue persuasively, and stand up for principles that matter. Jasmine Crockett had shown this in spades on national television, and the legal world would never be the same. Her confrontation with Dershowitz will be remembered as a pivotal moment in American legal and political discourse. It marked the end of an era where elite credentials could silence diverse voices, and the beginning of a new era where expertise is judged by performance, not pedigree. For viewers who witnessed this historic exchange, the message was clear. Never underestimate someone based on where they came from or where they went to school. Judge them by what they know, how they think, and what they stand for. If you learned something from this incredible showdown, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell, because in American politics and law, there are always more battles to be fought, more truth to be revealed, and more moments when the underdog proves that merit matters more than privilege. What did you think of Jasmine Crockett's performance? Let us know in the comments below, and share this video with anyone who needs to see what real legal expertise looks like in action.